Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies podcast, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers talk science, politics, engineering, veterans issues, mental health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How are you doing today, Richard?
I'm good, Pearson, coming from the unseasonably warm and sunny day in Oregon in January, where that's not the kind of weather we're supposed to have here.
Well, we're having accurate weather to the month. It is cold here in January down here in the Bay, as it should be, but it is sunny, as it always typically is, even when it's cold. So before we started, you were talking about how you're wrestling with physical clutter because it's just there's too many sets of things that you have to remember where they are. And then you were about to dive into that. I think you said something about home stuff and then work stuff.
People at work will ask me, hey, do we have a 10-inch length of twine that's frayed at one end and knotted at the other? And I'll say, I'm making this up. No one asked for that exact thing. This is a straw string I'm building to cut it down. And I'll say, I do, but right now I can't remember if it's in a red bin at my place in Woodburn, or if it's at the other campus, or if I imagined it, or if I had it at one point and gave it to somebody and forgot.
Yeah. That's four different. So basically what you're saying is it could be in 2 to 3 different places, or 2 to 3 different realities.
Yes.
Or
yes.
2 to 3 different times within those realities. Wow, very multiverse of that statement.
This is not my original thought, but there's this concept that really appealed to me when I heard it, and it's called one-handed and in the dark, and that isn't an onanistic activity. It is, can I reach into a cupboard and lift out a dinner plate if I couldn't see, and I don't require a second-hand tentacle or robotic gripper to get something off of the plate that I'm reaching for?
Okay.
Can I reach into a bag of things and pull out an item that I would expect it to be exactly that one item? And so that sounds like an extraordinarily obsessive compulsive and disordered way of thinking, but actually what it gets at is, well, if I can't do that, then what is the contributing factor to that problem? What contributes to that being the issue? Why is something stacked on top of the dinner plate that I have to move out of the way to get to the dinner plate?
Mm-hmm.
And it recursively gets back to the amount of things that we add to our lives with the expectation that they will improve our lives somehow. These are material objects. It could be dishes in the cupboard. It could be lengths of twine in a bin.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the first conceptual approaches to this is, don't organize something that should be thrown away. And I've started doing the throwing away part. I've actually started doing I'll open a box that I might have moved from one house to another house to another house. I'll look in the box. I will see things in the box that I think, oh, this is some cherished item. And then I have to do the math. This has been in a box for over 20 years and I haven't needed it or touched it.
Or cherished it, really.
Unless
cherishing it is hauling it around from place to place and allowing it to collect dust.
And it needs to go the hell away. And the corollary to that is, if you pick up something in your house, I'm going to pick up my cup right now. I'm going to hold this cup in my hand.
Got it. Cheers.
Now this is a little bit of an extreme case of this, but if you pick up something in your life, imagine it was covered in poop.
Yeah.
Would you wash it off or throw it away?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Would you wash it off or would you throw it away? And wow, that really causes a lot of stuff to go right out the door.
So this is really funny because in every way, I had a bunch of thoughts stream through my head in this. One is I can't relate to any of this problem. Really, first off, I have to wash crap off of shit all the time because of
I
the
know.
two dogs and the two kids that are under 5 years old. There's just
But
crap everywhere.
you're washing it off of things that you're keeping.
Exact. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's another thing. We had to move a house into. We had to move a 1,500 square foot house and a garage. That's a
Yeah.
lot into 1,000 square feet. And boy, I'll tell you, when you do that, everything that you moved is either truly a cherished item because my wife spent a year essentially combing through each of our stuff and being like, is this a keep? You know, and we're talking about anything that childhood memorabilia of mine that maybe survived. And so really like this happened and my wife, her rule has always been a box doesn't move with you until you've examined what's in that box and determined if it should move with you, because why would you ever do that work? Why would you move something
Right.
without knowing the contents of that box? You're doing extra work. So she would be antithetical to that idea. But the next thing I was thinking is I got out of the army and then I met Sarah before I ever got a chance to really accumulate crap.
Uh huh.
And I was in the army for 6 years. And during that, all my adult possessions were really my adult possessions that I had. I didn't really have much back at home, someplace storage,
Yep.
maybe like a snowboard at my aunt's house and a box of comic books. But I just got rid of things because you move so much in the army, especially as a single man. The first 4 years, 3 years in the military, you're just moving from barracks room to barracks room. I was in training in SWIC for 2 years, so you're never in a place
Hmm.
for longer than 2 or 3 months. And I'll tell you, you really get rid of a lot of stuff because you're like you
Yep.
find out, oh, I don't treasure much at all, right? And I'm not, and apparently I'm not very sentimental. You know, once you've moved and you have to haul it all because you don't have a car over there. I was hauling it in these body bags and stuff.
Yeah.
So I can uh I hear what you're saying, and I know people, and I'm sure plenty of people who listen to this will be like, I know exactly what Richard is feeling. I'm just in the opposite boat because like we are so space constrained. We can't keep anything that isn't going to be of use essentially, or that is not
Yep.
like a treasured piece of artwork by my son that does need to stay through the
Yeah.
nostalgia years. So, um, but I know the feeling of what you're feeling when you start to do what you're doing, and that is a really good feeling. Like when you're
Yep.
decluttering things and you're like, oh, it starts to become fun. Um,
Hmm.
you just make sure you don't get addicted to that feeling, otherwise you actually throw away stuff where you're like, wait, I threw away something I actually did need.
I had gone through a bunch of hardware from my garage and my shop, and I found this bin of a bunch of fasteners. And for those of you who are fastener literate, these are lag screws. So this is the type of screw that you only really need to use if you're attaching really heavy things into wooden posts.
Yes.
And I looked at these screws, and I had kept them for 10 years. I'd come through buy them through some, the classic. Someone else is throwing it away, and I can't tolerate waste, so I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
And I looked at these things and I went, I haven't touched them. Out of here. I wouldn't keep them if they were covered in poop. And just last week, of course, some students came to me and said, "Hey, do we have flag screws that are approximately this long?" And I said, "Yeah, I just got rid of them."
What? So I have a question. I mean, I know you do have a lot of hardware and handyman stuff probably in the shops and stuff. Don't you just take some of that, oh, well, the students will use this over in the machine shop at OIT. I mean, does that happen or
Yeah,
like,
and thus the beginning of our conversation, which is um, some years ago, probably around 2015, a student came to me one time and said, "There's a dumpster outside where I work. The business is throwing away everything from this one division
mm-hmm.
because they're closing that division, and it's all really valuable stuff. They would have paid a lot of money for it, but they're throwing it away, and I just can't imagine all of this treasure being wasted." And I said, well, what is it? And they said it was, oh, it's things like electric motors that would have gone into copier machines and that type of thing. And I
Okay.
said, well, yeah, bring it to campus. I mean, this is the type of stuff we could use. I've actually culled it 3 times, and we still have never used a single piece of
Well, there you go. Yeah.
it.
I'm sure
And
the second it all goes out, somebody will show up and like, I'm making a renewable energy powered super copier, like whatever, industrial printer, you know.
there's all these things that have that when I pick something up and hold it in my hand, I go, oh, I know what this costs. This is and I do the order of magnitude thing. You know, sometimes I get the order of magnitude thing wrong, but usually I'm about, oh, this is a 3-figure thing, this is a 4-figure thing, this is a 5-figure thing,
Yeah.
and I know what that stuff is worth. I know that to buy it later would be a pain, or whatever. And what lives in me, and probably a lot of people are, within our general age range, is still the trauma of the Great Depression. So keep every butter dish for a storage container, keep every you know piece of food that isn't completely bad yet, that
Do
whole
you,
thing.
I think you and I are probably old enough to feel that way, but I have to wonder because things are not built to last at all. And the last 20 years of stuff,
Yeah.
in large part, is produced to last 2 years tops. And much of it does not last. And I'm talking anything from cookware to spatulas to whatever, right? Even tool stuff these days doesn't, if you get anything from Ryobi, or whatever, stuff doesn't work as long as it's supposed to. Batteries certainly, like there's just all stuff is not designed to last a long period of time. And therefore, I think it does that does make it easier to let go. Like, well, I
Right.
mean, I think the big thing now is like inflation's so high all the time. It's like, shit, if I don't buy it now, how much is it going to
Yeah.
cost? So there's
Yeah.
that element right there, right? Where that one hits home, where it's like,
And this is the reason why. Well, this is one of the reasons why inflation is preferred over deflation, because in a consumption based growth economy like ours, if deflation begins to happen, it accrues, it gathers momentum, because of course you and I would look at something we were thinking of buying, but we know that it was a higher price 2 months ago. Maybe we'll wait another 2 months and see if the price drops again, and that's tragic for anyone who's selling these goods. Anyway,
yes,
the you've hit upon something that's interesting, that is a new phenomena in our lives, because in the mid-century, people that would have survived the Great Depression, and whatever age they were still working with economies of things of manufactured quality that had this sense of durability. Now, this is a little bit of me nostalgizing. Is that a word?
yeah.
This I'm doing nostalgia on this because I know there was crap that was made in the mid-century. There absolutely was just junk that people didn't keep
Oh
or care
yeah.
for.
And tons of
Same thing it is.
inventions that were
Yeah,
dumb inventions. We've
precisely.
seen, I mean, from the 60s and 70s, all kinds of kitchen goods. You'd be like, that's
Yeah,
stupid. That's a dumb
yeah.
idea, right? Yeah.
Or we don't eat that food anymore, or
Yeah.
it's too cheap to manufacture it, so we don't make it at home. Whatever it is.
Everything
So
had
there's lots
lead
of
in it,
things.
too.
Right,
Like,
right. Um, and in no way am I going to talk about a categorical. Am I going to go into a category of all the things that were cleaned out of the homes of grandparents who have since passed away in the last 20 years that lived through that period of time? Let's not do that. But I want to acknowledge that there were things that were kept by these people in these families that morphed throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s, such that when my spouse and I were living together the first couple of years that we were married, you could open a cabinet door and look into it, and there would be a melange of containers that had been originally yogurt containers, butter containers, margarine containers, whatever, something that some consumable quantity of food was sold in, but it had a resealable lid, and so then it went into a cupboard as some future storage container.
I mean, a lot of them were glass. Yeah, a lot of it was glass too. I mean, you'd have the mason jar, right? I mean, how many times do you see
Totally.
that get reused? Um, and we still do that. We buy, our cocktail cups that we use are these
Mm-hmm.
really good. They were the perfect size salsa glass, um, salsa container glasses.
Yeah.
They there's a perfect size. It's like a perfect drink glass. And those are mine and Sarah's, like the one we put champagne in. So, yeah, we still do that.
I literally saw a mason jar with stemware. It was made. It had a stemware base, but it
Yeah.
was a
Okay.
mason jar. Saw
Yeah.
that the other day. Um, but I know I'm talking about this transference of the preservation of something that has utility. You're getting a post-consumer use out of,
Yeah.
and we talked. The 1990s introduced this era of reduce, reuse, recycle, and so to be a person with some sense of consciousness about these things that we were consuming and using meant that saving these margarine dishes or picante sauce jars or everything that came into the house from the supermarket had this. It was like we were getting double points.
Yeah.
we were we were surviving the Great Depression still, so check. And also, this was better for the environment. Check and check. Our Look at our angel wings. Look how good
Yeah.
we are.
It's a good way of
And that
acquiring a lot of stuff before you know it, too, though.
absolutely. And so, when I talk about this, I should be able to reach into the cabinet and pull out a something, a dish or a glass or something.
Yeah.
I live alone, and my cabinet for all of these things had 3 layers of some type of serving dish or some type of storage container or some type of thing stacked on itself. And I just looked at it one day and I went, "What am I doing?
Yeah.
What is going on?"
Who are you entertaining on the weekends,
Yeah,
Richard, by the way, too?
I am not.
You're just
I'm
a
not doing any
bevy
of
of
this.
guests. And how come I haven't been over for dinner? Because you have so many serving plates and stuff. And like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
anyways,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's hilarious. Yeah. It's funny. I probably have weird relationships with stuff just because, like, I mean, like, I'm not sentimental now. I think it was just like it felt like the army really beat that out of me, because I was
Yeah.
just got rid of so much stuff. And now that I have kids, I can feel that sentimentality kind of showing back up because there's
Yep.
stuff where it's like, oh, yeah, I want to keep that, but it's total,
Yep.
it's junk, but it's sentimental junk. Um, what I find Sarah's really good at this stuff where anything that looks like it's storage for us is
Uh-huh.
actually cycled. Like if there's curtains or anything like that, nothing goes to storage to never be seen again. And
Yep.
a lot of times when people are like, "Oh, I put it away in storage," it's forgotten to never be used again, seen
Yeah.
again. It could be dishware, it could be glasses even that you just kind of stuff in the back. Or Sarah's really good at like they go through seasons, right? It's like, oh, now it's the season for this other cookware. It's the season for different curtains that go up or different bedding and stuff. And so even when we do have some of this stuff stored, it's like, well, we need a couple sets of bedding. Obviously, the kids, everything gets messy, but also
Yep.
she's really good about keeping it fresh because, and I don't know if this is just specific to her or if it's Persian culture, but your environment that you live in is insanely important. And Americans do not understand this for the most part. They're terrible at understanding that, like, your home is your sanctuary. If that's a room that you live in or whatever the equivalent domicile that you live in, and it should feel good to be there because you're there a lot. If you're not, you sleep there at least, but people are there. You're at your domicile for at least a third of your life, of
Mm-hmm.
the period of time. And it needs to make you feel very comfortable. And people kind of live in a state of discomfort and they don't even realize it for whatever reason because they haven't made their place comfortable to themselves.
Right.
And it's funny when I had met Sarah, I had done this to my room. When I got out of the Army, I had colored lights all over my room and then a whole bunch of tapestries all over the place, creating essentially some kind of Moroccan bazaar feel going on. It was really a place where the lighting wasn't direct and white so that I could come down from tripping on LSD often, essentially. Yeah. Well, the first year I got out, I made a place where I was like, oh, this is really nice to be high at, and chill. And so I did this, but my wife has been able to do that no matter where we're at. She's always like, we need to homify the place such that we're very comfortable there. And since you're home a lot when you have kids and stuff, as much as you're out busy doing stuff, you want that place to be comfortable as they tear it apart.
I shudder to even imagine what it would be like to constantly push back against the entropy that kids bring into your home world.
Never a dull moment, I'll tell you that.
I can't even imagine.
The most frustrating moments might be when you have just picked something up, you've just finished cleaning the thing, all the Legos have become contained in the container, and foolishly, some disaster, maybe the boys fighting, Kian, Poot, or something, has called me away from that bag before I put it away, and it is just sitting there, ripe for the plucking. And while I'm disposing of the said diaper, my now fresh butt Kian will go grab that bag and dump the whole thing out. Like, whoa, that was so much fun. And it's like, wow. Those are the moments where you really have to like bite down and not go into a murderous. But yes, that's when entropy really kicks it up a notch.
So I think that a core central, I don't know what maybe we'll get a nice terminology for this, but there's a lot about our culture in this country where a new product is suggested as a corrective to a problem in our lives. Most things in American society, we're told, can be fixed by a consumer product. And there is a modicum of truth to that because let's say, for example, a consumer product such as a cleaning supply or a cleaning material makes your life easier because it allows you to clean up after those rugrats running around dumping out things and smearing things on walls, then yes, that's where the truth is. But I think that it's so easy to hear that message as often as we do in this culture, but never analyze it, never like pick it apart and say, well, is this actually going to improve my life that much? And it just grows and grows.
So you said one thing there where you're like, at first you said fix and then you said improve. Yes. And these are two different things. And I do think they are different things. And then there's another thing where I think I would like to just yes and that because I think I agree with both of those. But I also think a lot of products are sold to, because this is America, enhance. You don't need it, but this will enhance your life, your living experience in some way. This will enhance your sports viewing experience in some way, whether, it's a TV size, a newer speaker system or whatever, a new type of direct TV that allows you to have multiple games going. So cable packages, there's a whole bunch of sports experiences that could be sold to somebody that enhance their viewing. They don't need it to watch sports. This will enhance your sports viewing. This will enhance your eating experience. You don't need a pasta maker, but man, wouldn't it be nice if you could make your own pasta from scratch and blah, 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 and like this, it's not something you need, but it's something that will enhance your whatever experience,
Yeah.
And I think that, so that could be added to this idea. I don't disagree that a lot of products can solve a lot of problems, and I think that's one of the cool things about America. Actually, might be is
Mm-hmm.
the idea that yeah, because it does promote stuff and ideas and
Mm-hmm.
innovation in some way. It does promote solving problems we didn't think we had, but
Right.
um, as someone like I'm a millennial, I feel like we are the generation of embracing like new foods, new stuff. Like, I bet you that more millennials in America have bidets than any other generation in our country. Easy, 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 easy.
That is a very interesting product to take a metric of as an example to that assertion.
Yes, but I think it's a good one to pick because I know a lot of millennial couples and we all have bidets. I mean, shit, I've had a bidet in the house. I Not having a bidet is actually insane to me. Like I'll tell you right now, having had a bidet now, and everyone who has a bidet will tell you this, they're
Yeah.
right. After you have one, it's insane not having one
Right.
because how, yeah, asses aren't being cleaned out there in America. I'll tell you that. And they're not being cleaned properly. And yeah, so I don't know how we got into this subject. Oh yeah, we did because we were talking about consumerism. But yeah, anyways, it's like so I'm a fan of consumerism, I think. I like the idea generally. I think it's one of the it if you're talking about American culture, that is a fundamental core tenet of American culture is
Right.
consumerism. Both the
Strong
good, the
agree.
bad, creating these products,
Yeah.
making money off of products, giving people services that they didn't know they need to things they didn't know they couldn't live without. That's pretty America.
I assert that almost any problem that I've seen people protest about could totally be addressed through the same approach that is used to get us to buy things that are enhancements to our lives as opposed to necessity.
That's an interesting assertion.
And it has everything to do with um, s- switching people's cultural expectations about some destructive thing to this thing over here that is not a problem or not destructive or not, doesn't create the problems associated with it or has some moral quality or it has some ethical improvement. The one that comes to mind is fur as a garment. And uh, let's see, where do I want to begin with this? In human history, garments containing fur were necessities. In places where we inhabited, northern latitudes or southern latitudes that were cold, then a garment that was made of animal skin with the fur left on
Yeah,
would have been the difference between survival and death in a lot of cases.
absolutely.
And as time has gone on, that necessity has gone away, but the quality of experience from that fur garment was not lost on people as um, affluence and industrialization meant that some products that totally could replace fur could for the majority of people. Our survival was no longer tied to that fur garment, and uh, what it became was a fetish item or a luxury good. And the industrialization around creating the inputs to fur garment making um, went completely beyond the traditional methods of capturing the inputs. So mink farms and so forth.
Yeah,
And if you
even
ever
when we were trapping where we're from, Oregon and Washington, I mean,
right,
gosh, we nearly extincted the beavers, which would have been an absolute tragedy
yeah,
if anybody knows anything about a beaver. Beavers are fascinating, amazing creatures. Um, you had a term for this we've talked about.
keystone species.
That's the one. Keystone species. Yes. So they're a keystone species. Yeah. Uh,
So in our modern times, I might circle back around and talk about the beaver again because I love the subject of it. Um, in our modern time, what you would see is people protesting where furs are sold.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this whole thing in Portland. You probably caught some of that news. There was a for a store that sold furs and protesters outside, and the whole thing just it was to me much ado about nothing, because what it meant was that there were people that were putting energy into something that wasn't going to change anything about what they were putting energy into. And what we were missing was someone enterprising around creating a product that was indistinguishable from that luxury good,
Yeah.
that didn't require the ethical problem of the industrialized fur manufacturing. So it's things like that, and I'm going to put a pin there because I don't feel like I want to go on about furs necessarily, but pick a problem that we have, and when we talk about climate change and global warming, sometimes that's an issue I'm talking about. We just productize the wrong thing, which contributes to the problem. If we productize and industrialize the thing that detracts from or takes the problem away, we could shift that way. It's just a matter of us inventing that thing.
Yeah, and like the fur trade, we saw the market
Mm-hmm.
change over time. We saw
Mm-hmm.
first off, fur was expensive. It's always been expensive,
Right.
and so many clothing manufacturers were jumping at the chance to invent a faux fur, right? Because then they could create garments of clothing and sell them to more of a mass audience instead of a certain
Totally.
income threshold. And suddenly you have, a booming industry of faux fur. And yeah, we see that. And just like with our reliance on oil, we've seen, we can start relying on other sources of renewable energy. There's been a lot of
Mm-hmm.
articles talking about uh, the revolution in batteries has really heated up. Like there's a lot of batteries being installed because they have a lot of really cool applications for our grid. It's really helping us. It's the batteries have been the missing piece to the solar and wind revolution, really. And a lot of I think big companies are wising up to the idea of using batteries to distribute energy resources. I mean, we're still pumping oil like crazy right now. We have an insane reliance on oil, but this isn't necessarily because of our country's need of that. This is mainly due to geopolitical factors, Russia, oil um, situation. Oil, we've put a lot of sanctions on Russian oil, and therefore we are selling and pumping more oil to Europe than ever before right now. So, and natural gas specifically too. So,
Um, you and I often have a discussion about petroleum products as the input that goes into transportation, or as an energy input. And if you haven't looked at it recently, go and find one of those infographics that shows the actual breakdown of crude oil into all the products that it becomes.
I think I
And
have recently. It's like 40% goes to plastics, right, or silicon based plastics. Um,
you'd be surprised at what crude oil becomes, that is either, and not even a plastic, that is either an input to some other kind of industry that makes a uh, let's see, the way I want to describe this is the the unknown story of crude oil is in something that causes two other things to thicken together and make a third product, right?
yeah,
You wouldn't think that surfactant or emollient or um, binding agent or something like that, like these things are the type of places where crude oil disappears into products that we would never think that they would go into. And so, like, there's this chemical called naphtha, and I heard of naphtha when I was fairly young,
okay.
because I discovered it as a alternative means of um, uh, welcome to Hidecast. This is where Pierce and I talk about the tanning industry and fur.
I was just thinking about oil's chemical composition being being open to a lot of different chemical mixtures and formulas because of the way oil is formulated. I had to look it up on my phone. I
Yeah.
was checking it out. But yeah, lots of carbon.
So naphtha is a product that comes from petroleum, from crude oil, and I discovered when I was in high school that naphtha is a highly effective way of tanning animal hides,
Okay.
of preserving animal hides. So I wanted to make buckskin. This is going back to um, that that uh, let's see, because of all those possible cultural inputs that I've had in my life, it really appealed to me to know how this one completely abandoned industry had worked and
Mhm.
had it still did in some ways. So we don't really think about where leather products come from or how they're made. And this really interested me as a senior in high school. And so I developed an understanding around that. And um, so now when I first saw that, it was just like one of those things that you stumble upon that you weren't going out of your way to find out what petroleum is made into.
Yeah.
But it turns out here's one of these petroleum products. But naphtha is like this precursor product to all these other things, and right, you could just look at this branching of things that goes out from petroleum. So
Yeah.
the the amount of petroleum that turns into either gasoline for your car, diesel for your Dodge pickup truck, or um, the more kerosene like fuels that aircraft
I was about
use.
to say jet fuel. Yeah. All the jet fuel
That is
stuff.
totally, that is a minority of the products that come from, let's say, one 55-gallon drum of crude
Yeah.
oil. Most of it goes into these hidden things that you wouldn't even think of. And I know it sounds like you would think of this, but it actually goes into our roads, right? There's a whole bunch of it that goes into the transportation network that is static, right? It's the roads and highways and
Yeah.
parking lots we drive on. There's a lot of oil that goes into what's called bunker oil, that is the transportation fuel for um, those ships that cross the ocean from Southeast Asia to North America, delivering all these wonderful that, that I'm
Yeah.
complaining about having to get rid of. So
Yeah.
when we think about what we're pumping oil for, it isn't that we're trying to keep some ridiculous number of single occupant automobiles on the road, although that turns out to be one part of it. But literally there's an enormous amount of heavy industry, light industry, and consumer industry that uses some version of some precursor material that comes from crude oil.
Oh yeah.
And it's astonishing what that is. It just shows up in things that you wouldn't even expect. But plastics are our number one thing.
Yeah.
Single use consumer grade plastics.
Yeah. It's a big one too, for sure. No, it's I think it was funny because when we've both listened to Peter Zeihan a number of times, and I've always tended to agree with his point that we need to do the green energy transition, not because we're going to get off of oil, but because we need so much power and so much
Right.
energy going forward that we need all of it. Like we need it all.
Yeah.
And even if we start to offset the use of fossil fuels and coal and these hydrocarbons that are coming from the ground, they're so useful in so many different processes and materials that we're never going to stop needing them or using
Yep.
them. And we're going to continue to find more and more use cases for them. Sometimes when we stop using, and this has happened with oil, as we've drilled and gotten more of it out of the ground, the applications for what we can use it for have grown exponentially, right? We were using it for roads. It was being used for roads before it was being used for fuel, unironically, for thousands of years in the Middle East. They were using some type of oil mixture, tar, whatever, to make
It was
roads.
we
What was the term
only
for
can
it?
guess. It's called macadam. We'll
Macadam.
get back to that in a second,
Yeah.
but uh, we can only guess what the constituent materials were in Greek fire, but we assume that the Byzantines had come up with a chemical formula that used petroleum and uh, uh, some other frothing agent, and essentially had figured out napalm.
Yeah. Everyone finds out a way to make some damn napalm. Um, but yeah, the point is that these materials are going to continue to be used. I mean, like we still use coal not to burn for fuel necessarily. I mean, we still do that as well, but it's
Right.
used in a lot of steel manufacturing and other metal manufacturing out there. Where coal is being used for a lot of different other. It's a byproduct to a lot of other stuff as well. Um, and these materials will continue to be used. We'll find newer applications for that. We're just exploring different uh, carbonic formulas used in hybridized electrolytes for batteries and stuff, and finding ways
Yeah.
using material science to hybridize some of these materials to make a better, electrolyte that carries more charge with it in the battery. So yeah, there's just so much. Even the stuff we think is trash is probably useful in so many other applications we haven't discovered yet. So I'll put it that way, right?
There, there's a quote I'm going to attribute to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was listening to him in an interview a couple days ago,
Nice.
and
Like Neil.
he likes on more than one occasion I've heard him talk about the predictions that futurists and scientists and people that were sort of intelligentsia at the time and could get a voice. How when they were asked, what do you think the future of the 20th century will be like, they're reporting from the 1890s, early 20th century. They would think about the technology at the time, and they would kind of have this linear idea about how that would look in the year 1980, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They imagined that if we have steamships and locomotives and zeppelins, airships now, then what we'll have in 1980 will be some variation on those being larger or faster or have some quality to them that is the technology is unchanged except in scale or application.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hilarious now to see how wrong they were. Um, the one of the favorites of Dr. Tyson is I think it was Orville Wright who had made some comment about how uh, transatlantic flights are really not going to be possible in the 20th century. Right? I have the quote wrong, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
it's something like that where even the inventor of the airplane couldn't see how it would change
In 10
in
years after he made the thing.
literally,
Yeah.
yeah, literally 10 years of development would change how it would be used.
Yeah.
And so this quote I'm going to attribute
People
to
said
that.
the car would never replace the horse and buggy. When
Well,
the
this is the quote.
oh,
You ready?
go
Here's the
for it. Yeah.
quote. So Neil deGrasse Tyson said in this interview, "No one studying manure is inventing the automobile." Now, the quote comes from this exact conversation about the problem of major metropolitan areas and the amount of manure that was being created by the horses that were moving all of industry and transportation, right? Every single thing that moved any distance longer than a person could really carry it was moved by a horse.
Yeah.
And everything that the horses either consumed or produced as waste was moved by another horse that was pulling some different cart. So the horse was an absolute necessity. We built civilization on the backs of horses, and they were the central problem of urban development.
Yeah.
So if people were putting their minds to figuring out how to more effectively either change the horse's diet to have less manure or to more efficiently move manure out of cities or coming up with new uses for manure as a, obviously it's obvious to us, I guess, it's a fertilizer, but coming up with all these ways to use it, no one studying manure was going to pick their heads up off their drawing boards and think about a different beast of burden that didn't eat hay and crap road apples.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the central idea that I'm working with here. You have to think past the manure problem to
Yeah.
solve it in a way that's non-linear to the problem.
For sure. It's funny. I thought of another problem that needed to be solved, but wasn't going to be solved directly the way people thought it would be. And that,
Right.
like, COVID solved this problem essentially because COVID caused work from home in mass and
Right.
required a home internet upgrade basically across the country almost, right?
Yep.
Because not only that, people started moving out of the dense cities where there were potentially fiber optic networks to mid-sized cities,
Yeah.
like Columbus, Ohio,
Yep.
like something like 1 million people, maybe Tacoma. These Salem, Oregon could maybe be it's grown quite a bit. We've seen. This caused a mass amount of infrastructure spend in fiber optic networks throughout the country. And we really needed fiber optic networks throughout the country. And that could potentially solve we've always developed our, our cities around our transportation source, which is why our cities are so freaking spread out in our country because cars
Yeah.
rule the world and of our American culture. We are
Hmm.
another very American thing is car culture. It's it's in the blood. We might have not been the first one to invent the car, but we definitely were the first one to mass manufacture that motherfucker. Shout out to the Nazi Ford. Um, I'm sorry,
So let's do the horse crap problem.
Nazi sympathizer. My bad. Sorry, Henry. Oh, so painful. Anyways, but yeah, so we created and then now we have the problem that our cities are too spread out. Traffic is a huge problem. Transportation. Unironically, the work from home solution solves both of these problems in a way because it's unfair because white collar workers who are allowed to work from home get this
Right.
advantage over people who have to drive in to be physically at your work. And many jobs do require physical participation in the work. But it does clear up traffic for both parties in a way. If less white collar workers are on the road, then that
Yeah.
frees up the roadways for blue collar workers or people who have to physically be at their work. Anyways, it's just once again, a lot of the in city problems are caused by the transportation issues that kind of shape our lives. So
We definitely we solved the horse manure problem with the car and created a brand new subset of new problems for sure. And
mhm.
that's the corollary to the uh, what do you want to Tyson's assertion, which is
Well, that leads
inventions.
yeah.
Yeah, inventions that are focused on the waste problem do not produce this other advantageous creation. And in the 20th century, one of the ways that we could describe this entire 100-year period is um, a lot of unintended consequences for a lot of progress happening really fast.
Yeah. Well, it has to because one of my central theories I've always shared with you is the progress over time theory. And the idea
Mm-hmm.
is that as we solve a paradox,
Mm-hmm.
more n plus one paradoxes or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the equation would be
Mm-hmm.
appear. And so we solve the horse and buggy problem and we create a whole bunch of new problems. That is the definition of progress. Just that's how we progress along. That's the motivation factor. It's like, well, now we have these
Mm-hmm.
cars. They're great. But they can go faster. They can kill people. They can carry more. There's a lot of advantages to cars. They go faster, further. They carry more people. They can carry
Mm-hmm.
more things, which is great. But also, they can kill more people than the horse and buggy could ever kill. They cause more pollution than the horse and buggy ever, and so on and so forth. And so we have to solve those problems. And those problems beget new problems, of course, right? Well, how do we get oil out of the ground? Oh, what happens when we can't drill oil out of the ground directly? Well, now there's fracking and there's all these different other types of ways of getting
Yeah.
the oil. How do the Canadians get their oil? Their oil processing is way different than ours, right? They get that really thick, I forget what theirs is called. It's some kind of weird, thick oil. Russians have a similar oil because they're on the same band, it looks like.
Right.
I think it's heavier than crude. I don't know what they call it. It's a specific name, but I know it requires
Tar sand?
it requires a specific ultra processing. Canadian
Huh.
crude does, and so does Russian. Um, you'd have to look up a Zion video. He goes into all the oil. He's a big oil file or whatever. He's into the hydrocarbons. He knows them all. So I'm not into it that much, but he talks about Canadian crude being super thick. So anyways, yeah, progress over time. I like, that's really funny that Neil has that saying, no one's studying shit solved the transportation problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've really gone around about how consumerism can solve problems, and that's part of American culture here today. That's definitely, I like this theme.
Yeah, it has its own inherent problems that are unintended, but one of the outcomes, this is, my assertion is that in the 20th century we solved a um, it's countable. It's a known number of human problems, but it's a number of human problems that I don't think we have enough time to articulate, which is to say that we human life and human civilization had been vexed by mortality, shortened lives and mortality,
Yeah.
attrition. Also, we'll use attrition as the terminology here for child people below the age of 5 and their mortality. So we solved the mortality problem that had vexed us up to this last century through changing how food was grown and processed, how medicine was understood and delivered. So food, medicine, and how to do all of this, because all of it requires more energy. We solved this energy problem that had been vexing us. Now, we weren't solving the energy problem with a brand new novel 20th century energy. We were using energy that we had been utilizing, we discovered and utilized for much longer in human history. The American petroleum oil history, I think it starts in the 1850s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
I'd have to
like
go look at
1858 or something, or 18.
Yeah,
It's like right around the Civil War.
it's just on the eve of, and what that was doing was solving the previous energy crisis, which had to do with the oil that was harvested from whales.
Oh yeah.
We had this lighting problem. Lighting is provided by whale oil. What are you going to do? Oh, petroleum actually can be fractioned in such a way that we get a similar kind of oil from the whale oil. So we solved all of these problems related to mortality and energy. I'm going to call it energy scarcity, a lack of energy density in the things that we were using.
Yeah.
And solved all of these problems. We created a whole bunch more, but we really created these amazing solutions to mortality and attrition that had vexed us for our entire history.
We definitely solved iterations, because none of these problems are ever like solved, right? It's like
Right.
it's like it's a stage. If we were a video game, right? We solved that level of hunger problem, right? Like that was like, these were boss levels that had, if they had vexed us for thousands of years, these were definitely boss levels. And then now we have like, there's smaller micro levels of solving, because, we haven't solved human hunger yet. We just haven't globally figured it out right yet. Right. But we've solved like the majority, these, and one of the thoughts I was having is like, what's funny is when we solve problems, the new problems, it's natural for us to look back at the problems and kind of go, those problems were these huge gargantuan problems, and the problems we face today aren't those gargantuan problems. But I think that the weighting is all about the relevance of time. And sometimes they might have been big problems, but we might have a shit ton of micro problems that we're already solving that can mass into large problems, right? And we could look at like food as a perfect example of that now. Well, yeah, we've solved a lot of hunger issues, but now we have obesity problems. We have mental health tied to food and eating disorders, which
Sure.
no one's really examined that. We've got plastics in all of our food, right? The rise and therefore carcinogens and cancer
Sure.
creating things are all in the food. This is all new stuff. They're like these little problems. It's not like, oh, a ton of people are maybe starving to death necessarily. And by the way, there that could be on the horizon in the near future based on the fact that Russia and Ukraine supply 40% of the world's grain, um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of Africa's grain, and
Mm-hmm.
Africa's economy is completely and I say Africa, I mean the entire continent generally is in a state of disarray right now. Like one of the foremost economies, Nigeria, is collapsing there right now. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows if their government will survive? Anyways, that's to say, hunger might be making a comeback for another big solving problem too. Like, yeah,
It won't be for lack of technology.
no, yeah,
It will be due to the uh, the way that human created systems, governments, and economies are the problem.
yes,
We've innovated around these things. I mean, a call back to our series that dealt with the creation of communism in Russia. It solved nothing. It was a total failure. Absolutely, I
yeah,
don't get me wrong, is what I'm about to say. But it was meant to address these types of problems as a um, civilizational an approach to managing a civilization
yeah,
and the rationing of materials. It was badly conceived, poorly executed, and a total failure. And yet, it's one of the few variations on what we have historically as a species used as the tools of organizing a civilization and rationing goods.
yeah. You know, it's funny. Maybe we should end on, since we're getting towards the end, it, where we've solved technology. We solved the electric car in the 1970s, right? But we didn't solve the problem, and it didn't fix anything, and no
Right.
one adopted it, and it was crushed because of political, social, and financial issues,
Sure.
economics, right? And so that is a good point that you bring up, is like, despite us inventing the technology or solving the problem necessarily,
Yeah.
doesn't mean we're applying that solution to the problems that it needs to be fixed in the first place, which is one thing. And another thing that is fascinating with that is that we I hear this all the time, and where people say, oh well, this isn't natural. They always talk about, so you hear this a lot, where people go, oh, that's not natural, or that's not the natural thing. And I always think that's funny, because it's like, wait a second, what do you mean it's not natural? Like, a lot of natural things are bad and they're trying to kill you. So like, that's not necessarily like, you know what I mean? This idea that anything that's natural is good and anything that's not natural is bad. I guess, like, that thought is the last thought I thought about when we're talking about this.
It shows up the most in our discussions about the flavoring that goes in our food. And I guess I'll give our audience some homework here. The book Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter by Ben Goldfarb. Strong recommend.
Yes.
It's an audio book if you want to consume it that way, but strongly recommended the book Eager. And you learn about the ways that the the beaver, which was a sought out organism for a contemporary popular fetish item product of the 18th century,
Yeah.
was nearly wiped out, and how their reintroduction into some ecosystems in North America has completely reverted the damage and degradation of those ecosystems. Um, I strongly recommend the book The Omnivore's Dilemma. And I don't know why the author's name just fell out of my head because I just had it. But anyway, The Omnivore's Dilemma, they talk about the types of products that go into our food, the industrialized modern food system that we rely on in this country, and how something that's called a natural ingredient and something that's called an artificial ingredient are the definitions are they don't fit our understanding of what those might mean. Those are
Yeah.
definitions. Michael Pollan is the author. Michael
Okay.
Pollan is the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma. And these are the types of, for further reading or homework, if you want to get to know more things that we're talking our discussions, some of the things that we know about come from these types of additional works of literature and about consumerism and the untold stories of things that we just don't really think about that much.
That's so funny. I love that. Those are great book recommendations. The thought occurred to me. I listened to a couple exercise scientists on YouTube that lift weights. And the ones that are all PhDs are arguing, of course, with each other right now.
Yes. In academia, there's two things that the PhDs participate in. It's called patricide and fratricide.
Yes.
This is where they get together and scream at each other over
Small
new
differences,
ideas and
typically,
old ideas.
but yes.
Yes, exactly. The narcissism of small differences is exercised.
A lot of small differences here, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you said this. You're not supposed to." Anyways, but there was this other guy who's a lifter who's not a PhD who was making fun of them, and I thought he was clearly not a PhD because he was such an idiot. No, I'm just joking. That's implying that all PhDs are smart, and they're not. But this guy was a particular brand of idiot, but he was a gym bro, and he was talking about nerds analyzing huge buff guys and how that they shouldn't, because that guy's bigger and buffer, and if they were in the jungle 1,000 years ago, or if they were in that big buff guy would just kill him. It would come down to a confrontation. And so nerds, they should just shut up, and they shouldn't just talk about dumb nerdy things or whatever you do. Like, you're inconsequential. In the real world, like, the big alpha male guy will destroy the nerd, and it's not natural. And while he was saying this, all I was thinking about was like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. And I just kept writing down like all these nerds who are running the world as we know it right now. And I was just thinking, like, this guy's a major idiot just saying these words out loud. Did he ever think about this? He's like thinking back like some movie with the nerds and the jocks or whatever. And but he just kept saying it's not natural, like the natural way of things, the natural order of things. And I was just like, I was like, natural. A lot of times the natural shit hasn't worked out very well, right? Like,
I'm gonna misquote one of our favorite speakers from the Navy War College, Sarah Payne.
Ah, yes.
And I believe she said something to the effect of, "Wars are not won by superior might, but by superior alliance."
Yeah.
So when we talk about this misunderstood idea of alpha and large predatory things, sometimes being large in a single combat situation is a great way to win.
Sometimes.
Sometimes it is a great way to go in with the wrong level of aptitude and expectation and totally be trounced.
Yeah.
And Sarah Payne's assertion that in human civilization, it is the alliances that we make that allow what would seem to not it would allow people that would seem not to fare well in the jungle to triumph for generations over others who are much bigger and stronger. And maybe we should leave the public with that.
I like it. That's
Make
a good
friends.
indie message.
Make friends. That's all. Right? Can't we all just be friends? That's all she's saying.
That's right. That's right. Make the right friends, at least. Yeah. And on that note, I've had a pleasure. I hope all of you all who are still listening to us after an hour of us jabbering along are still here, and that you are subscribing and sharing our video and doing all that stuff that I forget to say at the very beginning of this video. So, all right, Richard. Hey, have a good one. I'll talk to you soon.
Tip of the hat to you, Pearson. It's great talking with you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.